Hello. Hi, everyone. Testing. Can you hear me? Hello, everyone. Welcome to our session run by Creature Conserve this wonderful afternoon. It has really been a privilege for us to be here at this conference with everyone. Speaking with many of you over the course of the last few days has really been such a privilege for us. So the way that this is going to work, we're really encouraging folks to kind of squish into this middle, maybe like 12 tables. This is where we have like a lot of our materials. Of course, folks are welcome to stay on the periphery to listen and enjoy, but for those who are interested in being more interactive, more engaging, we have curated this space for you. So we are going to have maybe the first component of this workshop will be a bit of a lecture, a little bit of about what we do. There will be some chances for folks to ask questions and engage. Oh yeah, thank you. Here's our agenda. And then the second half will really be focused on ideating, thinking through conceptual concepts and creative practices. We're gonna be bouncing around, chatting with you, seeing how you're doing. So we really hope that folks are active, excited, open to being engaged. I know that it's been a long day, so hopefully you still have like a little bit of energy left in you for this workshop that we're really excited to share. So we're gonna reorder our presentation a little bit, so while folks are kind of trickling in, I'm gonna tell you a little bit about Creature Conserve, who we are and what we do, and then we're gonna bounce back and do a little bit of an icebreaker. So apologies for the spoilers. This is myself and Megan, who are presenters today. So my name is Derek Russell. I am the Director of Mentorship at Creature Conserve.
Hi, I'm Megan Elevato. I'm an artist and historian. I am a Creature Conserve mentee and scholarship recipient, and other things you'll learn about later.
Yeah, we have wonderful artwork and stories to share with you down the road. So with that, I will go ahead and walk you through Creature Conserve. So Creature Conserve, we began mostly as an online nonprofit based out of Rhode Island. We have really been around since 2016, but kicked off the majority of our programs during the pandemic when everyone was online. It really gave us the opportunity to connect with people across the globe. So we currently work in, at least for my program, I can say we work in 30 different countries, connecting with creative people, whether they're artists or scientists or somewhere in between. We really like to move past this idea of labels and think of all people as creative people. And so it's something that we like to do as we feel that it helps to communicate better and it helps to really make an impact and change as we're imagining a better and more equitable world for folks. So our foundational belief is that the arts, informed, inspired, and are prompted by science, we have the power to direct our attention to the ongoing loss of species and what we can do about it. Wildlife populations are declining around the world because of human impacts. We are all part of this problem, yet too few of us are part of the solution. We strive to take a more inviting and inclusive approach to wildlife conservation, open to diverse perspectives from the arts, humanities, science, traditional ecological knowledge, and beyond. So Creature Conserve, as it exists today, really stands on three core pillars, the first being our exhibition and curatorial programs. That is a program that we offer mostly in physical spaces across the country. We've had various exhibits, whether that is in Wyoming, in Rhode Island, in New York. We have different venues and folks that we work with. This is also the area where we're beginning to work with performing artists as well. That's mostly housed in New York. Then the next pillar is our mentorship programs, and those are programs that really focus on connecting artists and science, connecting people who are interested in the intersection between art and science but maybe aren't sure where to begin. So we offer a mentorship incubator program as well as a series of fellowships and sometimes subsidiary laboratories and special events. And then the last piece of it is our workshops. So that is one of the things that we're doing for you today. So congratulations, you are participating in a Creature Conserve workshop. And these are also predominantly conducted online, but we were invited here today to be with you and conduct one in person, which is very exciting. So a little bit about me as the mentorship director and a little bit about our programs. As I mentioned, the flagship program for mentorship is a project incubator. So this is for folks who really maybe have a great idea, have a really wonderful proposal, but don't quite know where to begin. So through a 6-month program connecting with professional artists and collaborators within our Creature Conserve community, we really create a supportive network for folks to work through these ideas, to test, to collaborate, to meet other creative people, and to really flesh out the possibility and potentiality of these ideas. We offer a mentorship fellowship for folks who are interested in arts and nonprofit engagement, and this is run in tandem with our program, where our fellows are working on the ground with our mentees, our mentors, and serving as the kind of interstitial fluid between people. You may hear me use that word a lot today. And then, of course, as I mentioned, we have other subsidiary programs that relate to the kind of concept, themes, and pedagogy of mentorship, including our mentorship workshop that we run once a year, as well as mentorship lab being an example of one of those special community-based programs. So in terms of our process, we really focus highly on research and art as a creative research practice. So here is an example from Saloni Thakur, who is looking into research related to earthworms in India. We also really encourage folks to think about the community, think about ways that they can engage people and push beyond kind of the self or the classroom per se, right? I think something that many artists fall into, many scientists as well, as we get stuck in our own bubbles. We're not quite sure how to share our work with others. We're not quite sure how to really form bonds and connections. And so this is an example of a fellowship project from Faith Williams that was in collaboration with the Boulder Public Library in Colorado. This is an example of a creative field research project by Anna Marie Lamond, and she was traveling around Mexico, supported by a Creature Conserve scholarship, working and visiting scientists related to axolotl research, and then curating these sketches into a deck of cards. You can see here some of the print material as an overview of some of the various projects and artwork that has come out of our program. I use, again, the term artwork loosely, as we really engage a whole variety of creative practices, whether that is the traditional illustration, painting, sculpture, or something more creative and conceptual like design or other printmaking, craft making, film and video, performance, etc. Anything that you can imagine as being creative, I'm sure that we've had at some point. We had a lawyer in our program, so we really are open to pushing the boundaries of what is the traditional creative practice, as well as a traditional scientific practice. And then this is an example from a mentee project as well, from Natalie Field, who had been collaborating and working with various specimen through her connections to the veterinary world. And so we will actually get a chance to hear a bit from Natalie about her project.
The methodology of material complicity, to marginalize form, to give agency to material, to follow that material and act with the material. And to this end, I embedded myself into the world of natural history conservation and artifact production by taking an apprenticeship with Guus Bellison at the Department of Clinical and Molecular Medicine at NTNU, which is the parent university to the Art Academy. So this shift from a lens-based practice to a material-led investigation of animal bodies as artistic medium required of me to learn the conservation techniques of taxidermy, skeleton articulation, entomology preservation, and more. And these processes all involve two very distinct phases, violence versus care. The deconstruction of the animal body can leave the animal lover rather traumatized. I'm personally a very empathetic person, and I feel a deep sense of loss for each of these lives or deaths that I have encountered. However, this is followed by the cathartic act of actually putting the broken animal back together. And I feel in some way that in mending their broken bodies, I'm also mending a piece of myself and of the world. So in order to reimagine narratives around the exceptionalism of man, we need not to only look at, but respond to the scene of the crime, i.e. the museum. I propose that we enter the site of investigation through the animal bodies, through the individual deaths and collective narratives in the context of the site of the museum. Because it is only through communing with the museum and the animal bodies that inhabit it that we can give a voice to the silent creatures that inertly dwell the institutional halls. So for example, the Sands of Time takes inspiration from a Victorian cloche I came upon in the archive of the Sverresborg Folk Museum. A glass dome filled with flowers in a small stuffed hummingbird variety, this type of home decor diorama became popularized in the late 1800s when natural history collection practices were at a high. This object motivated the creation of an antithesis to the traditional cloche narrative. So by turning the dome upside down and filling it with the skeletons of leaves and a crow, I am reflecting on the historical practice of excessive collection against the contemporary framework of the biodiversity crisis. Simultaneously, a sculpture and a cultural object, the mimetic potential of the animal artifact to simulate relics from the past allows the artistic intervention into a contemporary cultural institution. By virtue of the installation setting within the museum, the juxtapositioning of the artwork alongside existing objects allow them to establish a dialogue, to comment on and respond to one another.
So something I would like to reiterate is that I always say that at Creature Conserve, we are always kind of in a third space. We are usually artists or scientists or both, but really we occupy something that is unique and special and something that we share and hope to impart with you all today. So hopefully many of you are interested in the creative practices, interested in how that can be combined with scientific or research or activism as well, and we're excited to give you sort of the tools and maybe the first steps and encourage you to really engage on your own projects as you push out into your own practices. So we're going to jump back and do a little bit of an icebreaker, and Megan will be leading that for us. I'm going to move us to the correct slide here. Okay.
Hi, everybody. Okay, so we're going to start with an icebreaker because we do want this to be a dialogue. We want people to, we don't just want to be talking at you. And so we're going to do a show of hands first, and then we're going to ask you some questions about what your perspective is on Art-Sci collaborations. So just show of hands, how many of you are certain about what an Art-Sci collaboration looks like? And there's no right or wrong, but hands up if you're certain of what that can be. Okay, all right, okay, we can do this too, if it's like, all right, no, that's great. So that means that we're here for a reason and that you're not experts on this already. Okay, so for those of you who have done an Art-Sci collaboration, anyone done one before or think that they've done one? For a quick share out, what is it and what was your biggest takeaway? Great. Can we have a volunteer? We have someone. We know it's late in the day, so we wanted to come to you, but thank you for coming up.
I haven't personally done one, but our organization works with a program called Art-Servancy, where artists are paired up with a preserve in a local area, and then they have a residency on that preserve where they go whenever they want, they work with us, and they make whatever art medium they choose based off what inspires them there.
Great, and what's your name, just so we can get to know each other?
Name's Kira. Biggest takeaway is that art and science definitely have a place with each other.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? In the back. We're coming to you, don't worry. And if you can say your name and affiliation before you share with us, please.
Hi, my name is Marjorie. I'm at Friday Harbor Labs in Washington State. And last summer, I had the tremendous fun of co-facilitating a marine science ocean arts workshop for students through professionals. It was a 3-week immersive experience. And the takeaway was, oh my goodness, so much fun. And also the participants really surprised us in how much they brought forth the care and kinship aspect of the workshop.
Thank you. Anyone else want to share? Oh, right here.
Hi, I'm Kira from UW, Wisconsin. A friend of mine has kind of facilitated an art science workshop where they paired a grad student with an undergrad, and the undergrad student was kind of creating art around the research of the grad student, all around water research. That was
Great.
really cool.
What kind of art were they doing?
All kinds of, like some did like 3D art, some did painting, some did like using trash to create art.
Wonderful.
Upcycling.
We like to broaden our materials with Creature Conserve. Anyone else? an Art-Sci collab that wants to share out?
I'm Paige. I'm also from UW-Madison. We have in Madison in general something called the Bird Collision Corps. So it's similar to the movie that you guys saw last night in Chicago, but with Madison, where we have volunteers go out and like collect dead birds that have hit windows and monitor that and work to get regulations in place to prevent that from happening. And we were working with some artists last year to create an art installation in the ecology department building to sort of showcase like the birds that died because of that and what we're doing to prevent that from happening in the future.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, thank you for sharing out. We just wanted to get a feel of where everyone feels about Art-Sci collabs in the room. And so our next, for those of you who haven't done an Art-Sci collab before, what are you most curious about? This can help us also shape our conversation. Is it about where do you even start? Okay, thank you. Any other, where do you start? Question?
Results actually end up going to. Oh, should I repeat that?
So if I heard you correctly, you're curious about where it ends as well? All right, and how far it can go? Does it stop?
Yeah, or like where the results of the collaborations end up going to, or how you find a home for them.
Great. Does it stay with the scientist? Does it stay with the artist? Is it also an IP question in terms of who owns that project afterward? If it's a, okay, great. And behind you, there's somebody.
Where to find more funding for more such projects?
Funding. I think that's all of our questions, especially now, whether it's arts or science. Arts, there's always these questions about where the funding's coming from, but I know that science is also feeling a lot more now. Other questions? Great, yes.
Yeah, thanks. I guess, you know, we're trying to affect change, ultimately. So I guess I just have a question of how do we assess our work to affect the most change, or the best change, or the most pointed change? So that's just a question I have, thinking about this.
Great, so beyond awareness, but like call to action
Yes.
of some sort?
Yeah.
Great. Other curiosities?
I've been very disappointed over this conference to see a lot of AI-generated imagery in presentations. And so I think that there needs to be a better understanding of where scientists can seek artists to create graphical images for presentations or whatever they're doing.
Great, and so maybe where to find artists or graphic designers instead of just going to ChatGPT. Okay. Artist database, scientist database, or where to even a scientist can express their interest in doing a collaboration, perhaps. Creature Conserve is a great place for that too, connecting. Anyone else in terms of helping us understand of what you want to get out of this little workshop?
Good afternoon. I would like to see, as an educator, how to bring art into the science curriculum.
Okay. Thank you. All right, anyone else? All right, thank you for sharing. I know late in the day, it's kind of like you just want to sit back. We're hoping to get the blood flowing and minds going. So Derek is going to share his personal project, and then I'll share a little bit about mine.
Okay, thank you all for those wonderful responses, and we'll have various moments during our chat to check in and maybe offer some answers, offer some additional back and forth. So I'm looking forward to doing that with everyone as well. So we're going to enter the portion where we get to talk about our individual practices and give you sort of a glimpse as to what we do, why we're connected to Creature Conserve, and how we really think about making actionable change through art. So again, my name is Derek Russell, and so I consider myself a architectural designer. That's my background. I also consider myself a creative researcher and a Fulbright scholar from 2024 in the country of Ecuador. So a lot of my work tends to be very global. I work with a lot of communities, usually indigenous communities from various parts of the world, and various traditional craft practices as well. So something that's really important and interesting to me is traditional ecological knowledge, how we can begin to bridge that with scientific knowledge and really find a sort of common space in this very globalized society where we are beginning to have dialogue and spaces between people. I am the director of mentorship here at Creature Conserve, and we are now entering our 7th year of our program, which is insane. I don't know about all of you, but as time continues to fly, I am really amazed that we're almost at on the upper end of being in a decade in. So with that, I just wanted to start off with a photo that I took from the community that I work in. I work in a few different communities down in Ecuador, and this is a group of women known as Kenyao. They are a ceramic collective in the eastern side of Ecuador in the Amazonian River Basin. So we will begin to kind of unfold their story and my connection and collaboration with them through this little talk. And what brought me to Ecuador in the first place was this interest in material science, material studies, and also how that intersects culture. So I was looking for ways in which we can push beyond sustainability as an aesthetic value, but sustainability as a more embodied way of life. Sometimes we call this sumac causse, buen vivir, depending on who you're speaking with, and this was kind of my interest, and I began working with NGOs who were creating and building bamboo architecture. I eventually took an interest and moved into working with anthropologists. Is anyone here an anthropologist or adjacent or related? Okay, we've got a few hesitant hands. Hi, nice to meet you. Okay, so this is gonna be very interesting for you, I hope. And I was really interested in anthropology because these were folks who in Ecuador were really working with communities, were very present and available, but also who really took an interest in the creative practices and how creativity and culture are connected. So it was very much a natural pathway for me to go from looking into material science, material biology, into material culture and the ways in which community, sovereignty, climate change, all of these activism, they all work together and begin to work toward a more equitable goal. Something that you'll understand from Creature Conserve, from myself, from Megan, is that we are very much intersectional people. We have many hats, we work in different places. I think that something as important is always remembering that we're not all experts, but that we are experts in connecting with people or finding the right people who are the experts, who can give us the ability to make more informed decisions about what we're doing. So again, this is the Secopai community. They are an indigenous nation in Ecuador, about 2,000 people. They're extremely small. They have a language that, again, is only about 1,800 speakers strong, known as Paikoka, and they're a very vibrant community, but one of the main issues that they are facing in Ecuador is that they actually are split between their traditional territory from Ecuador and Peru by an ongoing border dispute that has lasted maybe the last 100 years since a treaty was signed. And so part of the difficulty of thinking about cultural preservation in this community is the physical barriers, the distance, but also, of course, the increasing role of technologization in society. Many communities, not just Secopai, but many in Ecuador, begin selling their land to either companies who are going to turn it into monocrop farms, or are really excited to, not excited, but are very willing to abandon traditional practices in the sake of wanting a more, what they perceive as modern existence or modern lifestyle. And something that I always push back on is this idea that indigenous practices are outside of modernity because they are contemporary, they are active, and I think giving folks the tools to understand that and find dignity in their work and their practice is something that art and creative practices really has the ability to do. So as an architect, I was looking at housing. I am very interested in typical architecture in this part of the world. As a creative researcher, we don't always have an outline or a map to go off of when we conduct field research or conduct collaborations with people. This was another intersection of mine with anthropology that really helped me guide the way. So I just wanted to include a little image of my studio space, some of the research that was ongoing. You can see a mix of photos, drawings, writing, etc. It's sort of working between all of these different media as a way to try to find a path forward. Here is an example that, again, is more literal in terms of the approach of systematizing how we understand creative practices, art making and whatnot, looking at different components of the typical house in this region, also trying to understand space and embodiment, right? There were times where I was working with participants and we were moving to physical locations or having dialogue and story, and I found that connecting art and science was a way to do that, and bringing, of course, the practical implications of what I learned and designing and building better ways to construct in these regions, but also to have information about materials, about practices between communities that are sometimes remote, fostering dialogue, and moving between these kind of interstitial spaces that are sometimes unable to move themselves. So that also led me to do some creative practices with folks more explicitly. So something that I had done with the women of Kenyao was to design a logo for them, and this was something that they had needed to connect with the Ecuadorian government and find grants to fund their work, right? So someone had asked about funding. Branding is a great way to start, or even just the ideating of, what is the way to describe a creative practice in a more concise and clear way. And also thinking about ceramic practices, something that I am really interested in and that I kind of carry into my material research is just this idea of the weight being in the making, right? Something that I tell a lot of my creative folks in mentorship, the folks who are maybe unsure of how to start into a new discipline or into a new creative practice, is that there is embodied knowledge in what you're doing, that it's not all in your head. Sometimes it's in the actual physical process of touching, of pushing, making. Someone had asked as well about AI earlier and sort of the implications of how to push past this idea that art has to be hyper perfect, hyper rendered. And some of my advice for folks who are getting into creative practices is just to touch something, whether it's Play-Doh, whether it's blocks, whether it's dirt or sand, because the act of manipulation is a creative act. And once we begin to understand our relationship to that, we begin to become more curious about how to manipulate things, about how to try out new medium, how things connect, what happens when you add water to it, etc. So with that, the specific project I wanted to focus on for the rest of this talk was a collaboration that I had done with the Lois Roth Foundation and the Newcomb Foundation. And I was interested in conducting basically intercultural dialogue in Ecuador. I had been visiting a lot of different communities and felt like there wasn't a lot of opportunities for folks to really share the wonderful creative crafts that they had been doing. And this was an opportunity fully funded for indigenous artists to come together and to share both their cultural background but also their creative disciplines. These are some of the ceramics that came out of this collaborative workshop that we did together in the Amazon. Something that I was also interested as a participant in this workshop was looking at indigenous and native dyes and the ways that that can be used in unique ways. I was also doing this in collaboration with papermaking. Here is a wonderful photo of Yadi, who is one of my consultants on this project, connecting with scientists and traditional ecological knowledge holders. Something that I really wanted to do is make sure that I brought in folks of different backgrounds who maybe wouldn't necessarily be present or have access to dialogue with indigenous communities as a way to kind of bridge that gap between them and to create a space that was more even for folks. Of course, creative practices are inherently collaborative. You can see here two different women holding on to the same thread as they try to work it together, and I think that this serves as a nice metaphor for the way that art can bridge people. It's always great to push past the notion that we are an expert in something, but to think about the ways that we can actually use these practices to literally bind people, but also to think about just the ways in which we can unsee maybe the way that we've been taught to see, or to think about things in a different method. So I'll just end by saying that, this is an ongoing conversation and there is not necessarily an end to it. Many people who do creative practices know that sometimes the work is never done, that you're always thinking, you're always making and remaking, and I think that as we begin to think about our scientific practices this way as well, or our activism practices, in an age of technology, we're constantly looking for new ways to narrativize cultural stories, new ways to narrativize cultural practices, and to think about how we can begin to really create equitable change, in this case, toward more sovereignty and more representation locally. Where's Megan? All right. How are we doing on time? Okay. Yeah. So we're going to take a pause and just see if anyone has any questions or just on anything that we have done so far or said so far. I'll open the floor up. Okay, excellent. Megan, take it away.
All right, everybody. Hello. So, thank you for spending your afternoon with us. As you can see, I am thinking of art as a portal. So a large part of my art practice is creating moments of visual engagement that lead to learning experiences, inspire ongoing curiosity, and if I'm lucky, some type of positive action. I'll get into what that looks like in a moment, but first, a little about me and how I got here to talk to you about Art-Sci collaborations. So here you see me, a picture painting a fireplace during an artist residency last year. So I was born and raised in Brooklyn and still live in New York City. I am the daughter of an engineer and microbiologist, and think of myself as having science in my genetics. My mom is both a microbiologist and artist, and so clearly I am an expression of the recessive artist gene. I am an artist and historian practicing ceramics, sculpture, illustration, and installation. So this is one of my illustrations. Last year, I was a winner of the Archtober postcard design contest put on by the Center for Architecture and the New York chapter of the American Institute of Architects. The prompt was to illustrate shared public spaces throughout New York City in the theme of "Wish You Were Here," a sentiment found on postcards around the world. I chose the Metropolitan Museum of Art's steps, which are populated by various densities of humans throughout the day, but will always have at least one pigeon, usually sitting there looking at you in judgment. And as you can see, my work centers on animals. Animals are my first love, and these examples are of my sculptural work in ceramics. I am intentional in selecting the animals I create, and I am inspired by the lessons a creature holds in their symbolism, such as the ermine, its coat used as trimming for clothes of royals and elites. But what if we took a closer look at the ermine itself, fully in its body, not a decoration? The dragon is an example of my interest in real and imagined beasts, integrated into spiritual ceremony around the world and throughout history. The vizcacha at the center, that's offering a blessing, is me questioning whether or not animals embody any of the anthropomorphic qualities and traits that we impose upon them. So as my practice has progressed, I was trying to find my place in the art world. Many artists have the goal of gallery representation, but as I spoke to people about my art and explained my intended messaging to learn more about animals in relation to their ecosystems and the ways that we humans have used, framed, and interpreted animals through our own lens, I realized that my place is more aligned with education and science. So since this epiphany, I pursue paths that allow me to integrate my art into science, specifically biological and ecological sciences, along with conservation and environmental justice initiatives. So I'm currently the Traditional Ecological Knowledge and Beaver Research Fellow at Beaver Institute, and if anyone is going to be in Minneapolis for BeaverCon at the end of September, please come by and say hello afterward. I am also a curatorial fellow at Enclave's Arts Alliance. I'm an urban environmental health lab fellow at Human Impacts Institute. That is quite the acronyms put together. And I'm here today representing Creature Can Serve as a former mentee and scholarship recipient. So before I provide a little case study about my own work as an Art-Sci collab, I want to share two Art-Sci collabs that have shaped how I see art and science working together. These two examples embody the idea of art as portal, that art in the service of capturing attention and inspiring someone to learn more, leading them down a path of science, or sometimes in my case, history. So some of you may be familiar with Joseph Albers or have heard of his name. Joseph Albers is an artist most closely associated with the Bauhaus, who taught at Black Mountain College in North Carolina. And one of his classes was on the use of color. These two plates are an example from his teaching that appear in the book Interaction of Color, originally published in 1963, and has been consistently published since then. So on the right are examples of two different colors, making two different colors look, on the right is two different colors looking, sorry, I'm not very good with my left and right. So on the left, the plate shows how the same color looks different based on what surrounds it. And on the right are examples of making two different colors look the same. So these color experiments hold the essential qualities that make art a portal to something else. And I think of this as like the what, whoa, and then I want to know more. So the first is getting that reaction from the viewer, and a reaction that is so full of wonder and helps them see something differently. In this case, Albers' work made me think more critically about color and consider juxtaposition as a tool for changing how something is received and interpreted. The second part of this, following the what, whoa, is why and how. Once the original thrill of seeing color in this light was calmed, I was more curious about how the eye works, neurology, light, and physics. So a few color plates can serve as a portal to a spectrum of scientific disciplines. So I fulfilled a childhood dream early in life by working at the American Museum of Natural History. Every day for over 2 years, I would walk through the Akeley Hall of African Mammals, past these majestic elephants to my office tucked behind a display in the Hall of African Peoples. So AMNH's dioramas are world-renowned and quintessential examples of blending art and science. While we know the focus of each diorama is a certain species of animal, to make it effective, craft and artistry are essential. The skill of taxidermy, the development of a compelling composition that includes the posture of the animals and positioning them in that scene, scientifically accurate realist paintings that serve as backdrops, combined with proper lighting to portray a specific moment taking place in a specific place in the world. I think of AMNH's dioramas as the ultimate what, whoa factor. They draw you in and invite you to stay. So the animals are captivating, but the experience is immersive. As you take time to look at the details, you find these, what we would call Easter eggs today, that are intentional and help us learn about the animal and beyond. I've highlighted the salmon in the foreground and the otter in the back. The salmon, otter, plants, portrayal of a certain time of day gives insight into a complex ecosystem at Canoe Bay on the Alaskan Peninsula and serves as breadcrumbs, enticing viewers to walk through the portal to botany, zoology, ecology, and so much more. So this is what I mean as art as a portal. So a more specific example is, beaver art as a portal. So last summer, during an artist residency with Enclave Arts Alliance on Governor's Island in New York Harbor, I created an installation entitled Building Like Beavers. New York Harbor was originally a major trading port, which most people know. One of the main resources the Dutch, English, and French were seeking in this area during the early colonial period are beaver pelts. As I researched, I learned that the Dutch West India Company first settled on present-day Governor's Island in 1624 before settling on Manhattan. And I started seeing beaver everywhere in New York City. Street names in Brooklyn and Manhattan, on the official seal of New York City, and it's also the official animal of New York State. And they're also found in the built environment, on buildings, and in the subway. So from that point, I fell down the rabbit hole, or we can say I slipped into the Beaver Lodge. So when I made this installation, my main goal was to transform the Western perspective of beaver as commodity and separate from humans, to invite viewers to see beavers as indigenous cultures do, as relations, teachers, and environmental partners. Beavers create conditions that are generative by increasing and supporting biodiversity. How can we be more like beavers in our everyday lives? The focal point of the room was a fireplace transformed into an altar. That's what I was painting in that earlier image. I created a life-size beaver sculpture. Okay, there's a laser on here, but not this one. Life-size beaver sculpture, you can see him there. That sat on a pond made of custom tiles. And I made a series of Dutch Delft-style tiles showing scenes of beaver life to sit on the mantle. My intention of the altar was to create beaver, or celebrate beaver as a role model and encourage curiosity about how to follow beaver's examples as creating conditions of care and sustenance for beings beyond themselves. And so visitors were invited to make an offering by sharing an action they would take in 3 months, within the next 3 months that would benefit at least one other person aside from themselves. The altar served as a portal to think about beavers differently and potential pathways to explore the curiosity that are found in other elements throughout the room. So one of those was this giant beaver illustration. I drew this giant cute beaver to be approximately the size of its ancient ancestor, the Castorioides, giant beaver who stood just under 5 feet tall when sitting upright. I hope to get that "what, whoa" response from people using scale and cuteness to think about the ancestor of present-day beaver. Once people found out that ancient beavers could be as tall or taller than the average person, it changed their perspective to think about an existence in which the power dynamic due to scale is shifted away from human favor. Another element was the flood wall, which was installed to provide a tangible sense of how much beavers typically flood their environments, 2 to 3 feet. For New Yorkers following Hurricane Sandy and increasingly frequent flooding, people have become more aware of water level lines and signs that indicate the height of floodwaters. So standing next to the flood wall and seeing that the water line was close to the hip level resonated with many visitors. And then the parachuting beavers, which were teased in my first, my title slide. And yes, maybe many of you know this already, but parachuting beavers are a real thing. In 1948, 76 beavers were dropped from a plane in specially engineered wooden boxes and parachuted their way into the wilderness of the Chamberlain Basin in Idaho. These beavers were removed from the growing suburbs of Idaho following World War II because they were seen as a nuisance causing flooding. Instead of trapping them, they were relocated. And so that's even something we're still doing today, not necessarily with the parachutes. But over the years, the parachuting beavers and their descendants created what is now part of the largest roadless forest in the lower 48 states. In 2018, during massive wildfires in Idaho, these areas occupied by beavers were the most resilient to fires and provided refuge for fleeing wildlife. So our parachuting beavers serve as portals to learning about beaver technology, land restoration, and unintended impacts on ecology for better, or human impacts on ecology for better or worse. And I share this example with you last because Art-Sci collaborations do not have to be one-to-one translations of scientific research. The what and woe effect can be inspired by an indirect source. And there's more beaver art, and this time with Creature Conserve. So shortly following the end of my residency on Governor's Island, I became a mentee with Creature Conserve, and I developed the next phase of my beaver pursuits. So Beaver as Teacher, where Building Like Beavers is an introduction, a 101 level course. Beaver as Teacher wades deeper into understanding beavers as creatures and learning about human-beaver relations. Beaver as Teacher is composed of 2 elements. One, a ceramic tile series, and the second, an educational card deck. So you've seen this lovely lady on the cards around. I'm sure you're wondering, maybe it's not the most traditional idea of Art-Sci collaborations. The scene captures this lovely lady before she leaves her house for the day as she's spraying her favorite perfume. From the bottle emerges a misty beaver ghost ready to envelope her neck with leathery vanilla notes. I'm sure many of you know that beaver castoreum has been used in perfumes along with food flavoring, and even food flavoring to this day. The perfume bottle is intentionally designed. The atomizer pump resembles a beaver tail, and the bottle is in the shape of a beaver's castor sac. So this tile is in a series of 14 that narrates and illustrates the integration of beavers into the human quotidian, from fueling the economy to titillating our taste buds to making us smell good. So a second in this series, and I won't go through all 14, don't worry. So two voraciously hungry men pull at beaver tail with their teeth. This vignette, Beaver is Delicious, is set in the 19th century. The man on the left is from the Blackfeet Nation in present-day Montana, and the man on the right is a descendant of European settlers. The beaver is a sacred medicine animal for the Blackfeet, and this surreal vignette was inspired by learning that during their expedition, Lewis and Clark documented beavers a lot, noting that there were beaver dams as far as the eye could see, and that there were beavers all throughout their trip. Lewis and Clark spent most of their time in present-day Montana, Blackfeet territory. So beavers fed both economically and literally as a source of nourishment the expansion of the United States from the wealth acquired by the fur trade to Lewis and Clark's expedition of westward expansion. In her book, Layla Phillip writes, "Beaver fed the core of discovery throughout the journey west. The men also shot elk, deer, and later bison, but according to Lewis, they were all keen for beaver. On May 2nd, 1805, Lewis noted that the flesh of beaver is esteemed as a delicacy among us. They particularly loved boiled beaver tail, which Lewis described as tasting like fresh tongues and sounds of cod." I'm not sure what sounds of cod, maybe hints of cod, but if you haven't tried beaver tail yet, that gives you a little bit of an idea. So for conservation to be successful, in my opinion, I think in many, humans must acknowledge their part within nature. We are part of a web. We too are delicate, and the systems we exist within are fragile. And I hope this tile series will shift viewers away from thinking of themselves as detached and distanced from nature. Reflecting on the history of human-beaver relations, which is a lot more involved than you might think, provides a case study for interrogating how humans interact with their non-human relations. How can understanding our past decisions and their consequences inform how we move forward in stewarding beavers, but more broadly, the environment and conservation initiatives? The card deck I created during my mentorship will be demonstrated during our next activity. But to conclude this portion, I hope you might see the potential in art-science collaborations and how art can serve as a portal to your research and as another lens to apply to your practice. So if you want to connect, that's my info. You can also say hi after, but opening to questions if anyone has some. Okay, do we move forward? All right, so now we're going to go on to the beaver card deck. So I had 12 cards. This is just one part of a larger deck, and I thought the easiest way was to blow them up large. And you'll see on your table, someone has the great blue heron, but they're all different animals. And they have on the top their creature name, a brief description of the creature's contributions to its ecosystem. So in terms of the blue heron, the great blue heron serves as indicators of an ecosystem's health, including water quality and presence of pollutants. A reflection question is meant to draw connections between non-human ecosystems and human ecosystems. So the question, and these could even serve as both playing cards, but also oracle cards, who or what serves as an indicator of how well your community is doing? And that is posed to you, the human. You'll see go find, and that's what we're going to do today. You find two different creatures that are connected to you within your ecosystem. And so the great blue heron is looking for a muskrat and a grizzly bear. The location of the creatures and system is a real ecosystem, so that is around the in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And you'll see little colors around your card, and those are relationship keys. So the pink is about sharing shelter, the green is about sharing food, and then the purple is a predator-prey. So I created these cards to visualize for people. So these cards can be used by educators, they can be used by policy folks. Sometimes you're having a meeting and need to advocate, especially when beavers are being advocated for, whether it's to ranchers or other communities, they're seen as nuisance because they cause flooding, they may cause problems. So how do you communicate to those who are not initiated in conservation dialogues about the benefits of having a more complete ecosystem? So we're gonna go and have folks come up. We're gonna put them up here, and then we'll do a reveal about what's on the other side of the cards. So who is our great blue heron? This is where someone from the table who wants to be a representative, if you can come on up. Okay, great blue heron. So you are looking for muskrat and grizzly bear. Where is our muskrat? Where is our grizzly bear? Okay, folks, come on up. Okay, thank you. So if you want to put, I did this intentionally, so if you want to put your great blue heron right on the upper here, and then you have to figure out where the grizzly bear and muskrat go based on the connections here. Different relationships. So shelter, food, predator, prey. So grizzly bear is looking for beaver. Where's the beaver? Okay. And our muskrat is looking, okay, for great blue heron and beaver, so we have to wait for beaver to arrive before we can find our other friends. Yep. Oh, that's one option, okay. Then beaver. Okay, our beaver is looking for the cottonwood. Where's our cottonwood? Okay. And cottonwood, who are you looking for? Mule deer and a beaver. Okay, so mule deer and, okay, it's okay, mule deer. Where's our mule deer? Thank you, mule deer. Mule deer, who are you looking for? Okay. All right, so this is where we have, yeah. So let's see. We have mule deer is looking for beaver. Okay. Yeah, we move over. And then you're looking for cottonwood and grizzly. Okay, so this is where it may look simple at first, but then we see, okay. All right, go ahead. All right, and then those, if you can see on the screen, yeah, we have, our relationships aren't matching up between our beaver and our cottonwood. And so we have to move our great blue heron up, or our muskrat up to connect with the great blue heron. And then our beaver connect with our guy over here. Okay, so we have grizzly bear, cottonwood, we're looking for great blue heron, and beaver, muskrat, and grizzly bear. Cottonwood and muskrat. So, do we have a sedge in the room? Where is our sedge? Okay. Sedge, who are you looking for? Beaver and? Oh, ruffled grouse. Yeah, where are the ruffed grouse? And who are you looking for? Okay, cottonwood and aspen. Are cottonwood and aspen in the house? Okay. So we have our cottonwood, we have our aspen coming up, okay. Pop it in like that. Yeah, that should work. Okay. And then who are you looking for? Moose. Where is our moose? Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I know we have duckweed. Where is our duckweed? And duckweed, who are you looking for? Trumpeter swan, our last but not least. Where is our trumpeter swan? Thank you. All right, last but not least. Thank you. Okay, so, yay, oh, thank you for the applause, and thank you all for being game to do this. We were trying to figure out a way to not have like 12 decks of cards on the table, but as you can see that we have our food source. Duckweed is a food source for our trumpeter swans as well as our moose. Our trumpeter swans share shelter with muskrats as well as beavers. They sometimes will nest on beaver lodges or on beaver dams because that water periphery protects their young. And we have sharing food sources between muskrat and great blue heron. We have our predator prey, where great blue heron will actually eat muskrats from time to time. So putting these together shows the entire ecosystem. Of course, there can be more complexity, and this is like a first version of this game, so if you have feedback for me, I welcome it. And Derek, do you want to help me flip this around? So there's another aspect to this. So sometimes when we talk about environments and animals, we focus so into the animal themselves and not necessarily to the, it's always kind of this balance between macro, micro. And so for people to become initiated in conservation and restoration dialogues, it's good to provide them with both. And how do you do that effectively without, a 2-hour lecture? So this, whenever you correctly connect the animals together, then when you flip over the cards, it will reveal the landscape that they live in. And so you can also work from this the opposite way, where if you assemble the puzzle of the landscape, then you can flip over the cards and see the animal connections that are there. So Grand Tetons in the background, and then you have an idea of all the creatures that, just a sampling, not all of them, of course. You can get more granular. This could be, instead of a 12-card set, it can be a 36-card set with connections. But it's a beginning and a conversation. And when someone's like, well, why are the beavers so important? I'm like, well, if you don't see where the great blue herons aren't here anymore, it's because the beaver population has dropped. And sometimes, and I believe it is in Wyoming, that the Great Blue Heron Conservancy also says that they are a beaver conservancy on below the surface because they see the connections between the animals that are there. So that is our little card deck. Questions, thoughts, feasibility in terms of integrating? Thank you for the thumbs up. Thank you, guys. Okay. So we'll leave that up there, and I'll pass it on to Derek for workshop time. And so if people don't have workshop sheets at their table, can you just please raise your hand and I'll run some over to you. Everyone have workshop stuff? Okay. Keep your hands up until I come and bring you things.
Hello? Okay. So with this portion, we are now going to move on to the idea of how to incorporate all of the different themes, the conceptual tools that we've discussed, and how to actually make this actionable. Something that I love about Megan's work is that we actually see the ability to start with a scientific concept, something that is maybe hard to grasp, maybe difficult to understand, but then we move into a form that is easy to create dialogue around. And something that I always tell the artists and the scientists that I work with is that we are always wondering who our audience is. We're always very curious about how we can create sort of the best connection and engagement with those audiences, right? Sometimes we're looking at young audiences, sometimes we're looking at older audiences, regionally specific, language specific, you name it. And something that is also really wonderful about this card deck that I'd like to point out is that a lot of times when we think about art and creative practice, we think about illustration. We think about something that is very obvious, something that is a literal representation of something. I grew up in Colorado. I grew up around a lot of mountain paintings. They're quite beautiful, right? And there is a really wonderful and emotional utility in creating mountain paintings, but it also doesn't tell you necessarily how to have an impact towards conserving those beautiful spaces, towards fostering that emotional, intergenerational connection to those spaces. And so at Creature Conserve, we're really interested in diving deeper into those thoughts and those themes. So I hope you all are enjoying your little workshop workbooks, and I'm going to walk you through a bit of the ideas behind what you can expect, and then we're going to take some time for folks to just chat with those at the table, to do some sketching, take notes, etc. Megan and I will be bouncing around to tables to talk with you and see how you're doing. And yeah. So the theme for this workbook we chose was elephants. And I wanted to start off by walking you through a series of artworks that were created by artists who are connected to Creature Conserve in different capacities, and think about the different science or biological concepts that are being portrayed in these. So this first image is by Akshita Tatlani, who is an artist from India, and she creates a lot of textile arts. So believe it or not, this very large elephant, it's maybe, I would say, 6 foot by 6 foot, maybe 2 meters, depending on which scale you use, is created entirely out of, I believe it's yarn, right? So something about approaching the materiality of an artwork perhaps changes the way that we understand it. Something that we also think about as creative people is the scale, right? If I'm encountering a very large piece of art, what does that mean to me as the viewer? So for example, if we're thinking about conservation or wildlife dilemmas related to elephants, what does it mean to actually encounter something that is large? How does that change my perception or understanding of the scientific concept? Here, again, the materiality is important. How does it feel to encounter something that is soft or something that is pliable? What does it mean when we can touch art versus when we look at art? So next we have an example from America Fernando, who was interested in educating children in Sri Lanka around human-elephant conflicts. So she took a very different approach to this same topic. She was interested in creating educational materials and thinking about the literacy that folks are experiencing, and she's from Sri Lanka as well. So something that she really heavily relies on here is text. So as we begin to communicate, again, with different audiences and people, we think about the different forms of art, right? Thinking about writing, thinking about literary practices, or thinking about illustration, and wondering if there is maybe a different medium or a different way to express the two. So in this case, it heavily relies on the text as a way to form the basis of the communication, but the text is of course connected to these wonderful watercolor illustrations. Something that I could get into all day is even just what types of paint you're using, what type of media, and how that also can change the conceptual understanding of a topic. These colors are intentionally made to be inviting, they're intentionally vibrant, very fluid, as a way to appeal to young audiences. So then we move on to a different style of art. This is a comic strip, and here we're also thinking about human-elephant conflicts. But here we're doing it through a series of images, not just a single image. So we begin to wonder, what is it about the connection between images that actually creates a narrative as a whole? So here we have little to no words, but yet we're still wondering about this character, about this elephant, about how it moves through the different environments, and also how it's impacted by clearly human construction. So moving things further to be perhaps a bit less literal, what happens if we only show a part of the elephant? Do we begin to actually understand the creature in its entirety, its ecosystem, etc.? So this is an artwork created by Deepika Nandan, and you can see here that she was overlaying textures from banana leaves actually into the artwork itself. So these are banana leaf prints in the center, but actually the literal texture of the artwork here is sourced using those materials. So here we see the trunk of an elephant reaching out towards a human hand, and we begin to wonder, how do humans and elephants relate to each other? How do these biological structures that maybe have similar construction to them begin to relate to one another? How are humans and elephants more similar than they are different when we only begin to see a part of the organism? Then we move on to this work, looking at Sumatran elephants in Indonesia and thinking about how their habitats have been fragmented. We see that instead of showing perhaps a literal farm being broken into pieces, perhaps showing a map, we actually begin to see the elephant itself deconstruct and to fall into pieces. And we look at that as a way to really understand not only the literal interpretation of an elephant in a fragmented habitat, but perhaps the emotional feeling of being an elephant in those environments. And then we move on to this piece. This is an illustration that I did many years ago, and this is thinking about different urban connections between humans and elephants. So through a series of different environments and creatures, we begin to think about the different ways that humans inhabit the landscape and how the human landscape impacts our understanding of wildlife. So here we move beyond having a single elephant, but into having multiple different types of creatures in multiple different landscapes, but something still ties them all together, and that is this collective thread between the image, between the mark making, and also the composition that moves people from left to right, also thinking about how we move forward into articulating these spaces that are yet to be articulated. So with that, you can see that with the same prompt, right, thinking just about human-elephant conflict, we had such a variety of interactions, of ways that our creative people respond to it. And that's something that I like to reiterate a lot, is that there is never one way of making something or communicating with anyone, right? There's no correct answer, because art is such a relational medium, and that we're constantly using art as a way to create dialogue or to bring in conversation with people. So now we're going to move on to the body of the workshop and think quickly about what is a tool. So I like to use this tool as basically a conceptual medium to think through the different ideas that we would like to express within our art making or our creative practice, right? So think perhaps back to your scientific practices or your activism practices. What are tools that you use to make an impact or to move the narrative forward with people, right? And so these are moving beyond literal tools, right? Maybe a car in the field or a piece of paper used to draw, but we're thinking more about the conceptual ideas that really form connections between people. So to read this explicitly, tools are practical lenses that we apply to our artistic practices or scientific practices that help us reinterpret a given dilemma. They help us to decenter the way that we've been thinking in order to imagine the best way to communicate for a particular topic. A tool is a metaphor, not necessarily literal, and thinking about tools after you have used in the past or that you would like to use in the future, you'll be creating visual representations that you feel are relative to your practice. So to walk through some example, this is a building in Denver. Colorado is my home, so I wanted to give it a bit of a shout out. This is called Populous by Studio Gang, and you can see here that the whole thing is adorned by a very unique structure. So this is actually lifted from the structure of an aspen tree. And oftentimes we call this biomimicry when we look at the creative practices, but I want to point out that biomimicry can sometimes also be a bit of an aesthetic. I think artists can sometimes use the visual of a scientific practice. Something that we're interested is pushing past science as an aesthetic, but as an embodied practice. So here we can see that the structure is not only just adorned in these eye-like structures that they've lifted from the aspen trees, but each of these, the size and the scale and the shape of them, refers to the different program that goes on inside the building. So by looking from the outside, we can begin to understand what is happening on the inside, whether they are private rooms or large gathering spaces. This is also a form of, in architecture we would call this tectonics, meaning its response to light and nature and weather. So these windows also are used in a functional way to mitigate the impacts of having heat loss or heat gain through passive heating effectively. And here's an example of what one of the rooms look like inside. So taking that concept of the aspen tree, or the concept of the tree as a structure, here is an example of a furniture piece that we're moving actually into a space where we're not just trying to replicate the visual identity of something. This doesn't necessarily look like a tree, but we are focusing and interested in the structure of it. So for those who are aware of architecture, right, we have a beam, the load needs to be on the beam. So here we actually are looking at the biology of trees and undoing that as a way to create a new structural balance in this chair. You can see that it actually had to be constructed in a unique way where it couldn't all be done at the same time. It had to be done in different components. And so as creative people, this is a way that we can use science or connect science to art as a way to create new ways of structural building. So just to give an overview, so today's workshop is the continuation of similar themes that we've discussed in the mentorship workshops that I run with Creature Conserve. We offer different case studies and folks collaborate together, also with scientists and experts to think about creative visions for how they would solve a dilemma. And I use the word solve lightly because something that we were really interested in is the process and about how we incorporate art and science practices, not necessarily the end result. So in response to a case study about mountain gorillas in Rwanda, this group chose to think about their tool as a shoe, but not a shoe as a literal shoe, but a shoe as a measuring device that helps us understand how close or far that we can get to mountain gorillas as a way to create like a zoonotic safety net. So a lot of times when we think about processes, the way that we interpret just our thinking, we think about it in a linear methodology, right? I start with an idea, I choose what medium I'm going to use, whether that's paint or sculpture or architecture. I find people who are interested, I find some scientists who are interested, I make the art, and it's done. So that is kind of a common way of thinking through the creative practice. So something that we like to do is upend that and think about how we can begin to think about all of these things, not necessarily simultaneously, but in connection to one another. So you can see here that we remove the hierarchy and we think that the idea and the outcome are fluid, and that we don't always start somewhere and end in the same place, that we are constantly moving between something. In my program, in mentorship, you'll find that a lot of times folks will come in with a very clear idea. They'll say, I have a certain wildlife conflict, I have a specific medium that I want to use to do it, I'm going to use this program to do it. But through the 6 months of having conversation with scientists, with partners, with other artists, creative people, etc., the idea usually changes, and usually where people begin is completely different than where they started. And I think that's something that we like to encourage as folks also think about their own practices as a malleable medium that responds to its environment. I'm going to move past this. So something that I have touched on a little bit, but would just like to reiterate here is that art and creativity can also be a research practice. And so there are different pedagogical ways that we can use those as tools to think through ideas, right? Whether that's through the materials, whether that's through research, whether that's through comparing images, et cetera. So this is an example from another subsidiary mentorship program where we were thinking about understanding participation, understanding community building in design, and using art as a tool for that. So I love this quote from Meg Gorman, who was a participant in our laboratory, where she asks us to reconsider research and think that science is a process and not necessarily a subject. That science is something that's evolving and something that we are constantly shifting with instead of as a set means. So with that, we're going to move into our case study and our making component. And I want you all to just consider your own practices and how it can be malleable, change, and shift. So you've all been provided with a case study, and this case study is about human-elephant conflicts. I will sort of go over the brief notes with you. So the elephant problem is the abundance of elephant migration to protected areas. These accelerated rates of population growth can cause sudden changes in the ecosystem. Savanna elephants, this is looking in South Africa, can rapidly transition forests into shrubland, grassland, or bramble-like thicket, resulting in the local extirpation of some selected species, thereby threatening the biodiversity dependent on certain woody species. So in the Lowveld of Kruger National Park, it has become an emblem for controversial wildlife management practices, implementing a culling program between 1967 and 1994. Critics have noted that given the multifaceted needs of forest regrowth, it's unclear that reducing the density of elephants alone would result in woodland recovery. So at your tables, in groups, you're all going to consider this conservation dilemma. It's something that we intentionally chose as being controversial. There is not necessarily an obvious or easy answer to it, but how would you begin to tackle this problem? How would you begin to think about ways to communicate or foster dialogue with people? As scientists and creative people, how would you begin to actually develop a practice related to this where you can begin to move the needle to have an impact? So more concretely, we're asking you to design an experiment. So in creative practice, we use tools to help us communicate complex ideas. Think of a tool that you have used in your scientific practice or one that you would like to use in the future and create a visual or written representation of it. Consider your methodology, what components are in your scientific toolbox that help you communicate with your work. Once you've done that, we'll ask you to consider the case study and imagine ways that your tool or your methods as a scientist could be applied to a prospective solution. After that, we'll ask you to draft a potential response, similar to how we saw the shoe illustration related to the mountain gorilla case study. Think about how you can respond carefully and communicate this topic. How your tool would be able to be visible maybe to someone who's not in your field, someone who's not a scientist. And after that, imagine if you were to conduct research or an experimental or environmental action around this case study. How would you begin to incorporate creative people if you don't feel like yourself are creative but would like to engage with other creative peoples? So we are going to circulate around while folks do some thinking and chat about it, and this is also a great time for folks to just ask us any questions personally, one-on-one, about anything that we've presented so far. Oh, and we'll circle back near the end as well for any other just like group thoughts, questions, and reflections. So. Also, if folks have any questions, feel free to raise your hand, let us know, and we'll be happy to come and chat.